Watch your sister's wedding online. That's what the text said. No context. No follow-up. Just a link and a timestamp. From my parents. That Saturday morning, I was standing in the kitchen of my quiet Charleston townhouse, sipping lukewarm coffee and sorting mail when the notification buzzed on my phone. I didn't even open the message right away. I assumed it was some forwarded article or another reminder about Mom's book club fundraiser. But when I finally looked, the words were blunt, cold. A command disguised as invitation. I clicked the link. A pristine, overly curated livestream page, loaded with a countdown timer and a soft piano track. My sister Chloe was getting married, and I hadn't even been told it was happening. My name is Robin Wright. I'm 45 years old, and for most of my life, I thought loyalty could hold a family together. That if you gave everything, stayed quiet, worked hard, and didn't ask for more, you'd be safe. I used to believe in duty, in legacy, in doing the right thing, even when no one's watching, especially when no one's watching. I helped build my father's company from the ground up, Wright Atelier, a boutique, architectural and interiors firm we ran out of a 2-story restored firehouse near downtown Charleston. For 18 years, I was the COO, the one who kept it all together, while my father smiled in photos and my younger half-sister Chloe flitted in and out of the office, too busy chasing creative inspiration to file a client brief correctly. But she was charming, beautiful, spontaneous. She made clients laugh, while I made the contracts make sense. Dad used to say, Robin is the backbone, but Chloe is the spark, as if the spark mattered more than the spine holding the body up. But I never pushed back. I believed my turn would come, that when my father eventually retired, I would take over, that all the years of sacrifice, kind of skipping vacations and staying late and cleaning up messes that weren't mine, it would mean something. I stayed loyal. Even when my father married Elaine, a woman 15 years younger, who quickly made it known that she preferred Chloe's artistic flair over my operational discipline, I stayed loyal. I thought they'd see my work, that being indispensable would protect me. 2 months before that wedding live stream, I found out the truth. Not from a conversation, not even from a mistake on their end. It came through a legal email thread I wasn't supposed to see. A paralegal had CC'd me by accident on a message to my father's lawyer, confirming the finalization of the company's new ownership structure. Chloe would now hold 51%. My name wasn't mentioned. Not once. I sat at my desk that night, reading every line of the document, every cold paragraph stripping me from the business I'd helped build. My chest was tight, my hands shaking. I called my father. He didn't answer. I emailed. Nothing. A week passed before I got a response from Elaine. This is what's best for the family, she wrote. Chloe brings a new era of creativity. You've been such a steady support. We know you'll understand. Understand what that I had been quietly erased from my life's work, that they were handing over the business to someone who had never worked more than 20 hours a week, who never once managed a project, start to finish, who left mid-meeting to clear her energy. At first, I thought it was temporary, that I'd be offered something else. A board seat, a partnership, at least a conversation. But the silence stretched, and then came that text. Watch your sister's wedding online. No invitation. No explanation. No seat at the table. I stared at that screen, my breath shallow. The wedding background music was swelling. Chloe was about to walk down the aisle, probably in some designer gown paid for by the family trust. My trust. The one I had spent 20 years protecting. The chat box below the livestream was full of comments from people I recognized, old clients, former colleagues, even 2 of my college friends who had gone on to work with Chloe's new branding firm. They were congratulating her, sending hearts, typing things like, "You deserve this day." Clue, and I wondered, Sitting there in my own home in the city, I helped rebuild after every hurricane and economic crash. If anyone even noticed, I wasn't there. The truth is, I could have crashed the wedding. I knew the venue. I had RSVP'd for Chloe's events more times than I could count when she forgot to follow up. But something inside me had already snapped weeks earlier. The text was just confirmation. I didn't belong there anymore. Not in that company. Not in that house. Not even as a guest in their celebrations. So I did what they told me to. I watched. I sat back. And I let it all unfold. I let the glossy live stream play out. Her vows rehearsed to perfection. The crowd laughing. The photographers circling like flies around a centerpiece. I watched them smile, completely unaware that the foundation they were standing on had started to crack long ago. They just didn't know it yet. The irony on my desk that day, beneath the laptop showing my erasure in real time, was a folder from Marcus Bell, an old friend, a rival once. Now, the CEO of a growing architecture collective headquartered in Atlanta. 2 weeks before the wedding, he had reached out. I heard about the changes at Wright. He wrote, "If you're open to talking, I have a proposal. Something new. Something yours." I hadn't replied. Not yet. But as the live stream faded to black, and my mother texted a generic, "Hope you're doing okay," I picked up my phone and finally responded to Marcus. "Let's talk Monday." Before Marcus and his offer, before the live stream and the text that would snap the last thread I had left, there was just work. There was always just work. Wright Atelier wasn't some faceless corporation. It was our family's name on every blueprint, every door frame, every skyline detail we were lucky enough to touch. When I joined after graduate school, it wasn't because I lacked other options. I had 3 offers on the table. One from a firm in Chicago that built the River South redevelopment, and another from a boutique group in Portland, known for restoring historical homes. But I came home to Charleston because I believed in what we were building. I believed in my father. I thought he believed in me, too. For the first few years, it was just the 2 of us and a part-time assistant. We handled everything. I was 26 and hungry. The kind of hunger that makes you skip meals and sleep with spreadsheets still open on your laptop. I didn't need glory. I just needed growth. And we did grow. I brought in new processes. I streamlined client onboarding. I helped us transition from paper-based design workflows into full-scale architectural visualization. A move that saved us both money and time. Within 3 years, we had doubled our client base. Within 5, we had to lease the building next door. But the title on the company door never changed. It was still just Right. I never pushed for my name to be added. I didn't need to. Or, so I told myself. Chloe, by comparison, floated in and out. She was still in art school when I joined the firm. At 20, she was all bangles and sketchbooks and drama. Our father adored her. Elaine made excuses for her. I, on the other hand, tried to guide her. When she wanted to design our seasonal branding, I let her. When she missed a deadline, I stayed late and cleaned it up. When she forgot to confirm client meetings or walked in 20 minutes late wearing sunglasses indoors, I smoothed things over. I didn't resent her at first. Not really. I thought I was protecting her, teaching her. But now I know I was enabling something I didn't fully understand yet. She wasn't failing upward. She was being lifted. The cracks started showing 5 years ago when our father announced his succession plan at a company retreat. It was vague. More of a family speech than a business statement. He said both his daughters had made him proud, and that the future of Wright Atelier would be shaped by a balance of vision and structure. I smiled politely. I had no idea that, behind the scenes, he was already working with his lawyer on the restructuring. When I think back, there were signs. Chloe being looped into meetings I wasn't told about. Her name appearing on project credits when I knew I had done the bulk of the work, Comments like Chloe brings the spirit or Robin. You're always the adult in the room that were meant as compliments, but landed like paper cuts on skin already raw from overuse. But I stayed quiet. I thought my results would protect me. When our firm landed the Harborview Civic Center, it was because I had personally negotiated the contract, resolved the zoning issue, and walked the city planner through every single phase. My father gave Chloe the opening remarks at the launch. She wore a linen jumpsuit and forgot the architect's name. I stayed backstage and made sure the lighting didn't overheat the floral installations. When we got nominated for the Southeastern Design Excellence Award, Chloe got flown to New York to accept on behalf of the firm. I didn't go. I had back-to-back meetings with vendors and 3 client deadlines. She came back with photos and a gold statue I wasn't allowed to display in my office. "Let's keep the energy consistent," Elaine said when I asked. It wasn't about ego. It was about invisibility. You can survive being overlooked a few times, maybe even a dozen. But at some point, when every contribution is labeled support, and every success is attributed to someone who wasn't in the room, your sense of self erodes. I stopped talking in meetings. I stopped correcting errors. I watched as Chloe led pitches I had built and took credit for relationships I had nurtured for years. And I watched our father let it happen. The final blow came one Thursday evening when I returned from a site visit and found a cake in the break room. Chloe had been promoted to Chief Creative Partner, a title that didn't exist until that moment. There were balloons, a speech, a group photo I wasn't told about. My name wasn't on the list of people thanked. I went back to my desk, closed the door, and finished the quarterly budget. That night, my inbox held the paralegal's email, the ownership transfer document I wasn't meant to see. What followed was numbness. I didn't rage. I didn't cry. I simply stopped. I started arriving later. I left earlier. I let Chloe present solo. I deleted draft proposals. I knew she couldn't recreate. I didn't sabotage. I didn't need to. Her inexperience would speak for itself. My absence would be louder than my presence ever was. And that's why, when that wedding livestream opened on my screen weeks later, I didn't yell or throw my phone or text a bitter response. I watched. Quietly. Intentionally. Like an architect evaluating a building she once designed. Now, painted over in someone else's colors. And when it was over, I didn't mourn. I reached for Marcus Bell's folder and finally opened the first page. Monday arrived, like it always did. But this time, the dread didn't show up with it. I woke up before the alarm and didn't bother with makeup. For once, I wasn't dressing to be taken seriously by people who had long since decided I didn't matter. I wore a black turtleneck and gray slacks. Clean lines. No message. I wasn't going to write a Tellier today. I was going to meet someone who remembered who I was before I became background noise in my own career. Marcus Bell hadn't changed much. At least not on the surface. He still wore those fitted blazers and expensive watches. Still had that confidence that teetered on arrogance, but never quite fell over. We met at a corner cafe near the waterfront. Early enough that the place was still quiet. I sat down across from him, unsure of what to expect. We hadn't spoken properly in years. Not since we both pitched the Middleton Gallery renovation and lost to a firm from Boston with flashier mock-ups and no sense of local history. That project had stung, but our mutual respect had never faltered. He didn't waste time with small talk. He just said, "I know what they did to you. And if you're even considering starting fresh, I want you with me." That sentence alone would have meant nothing 10 years ago, when I still clung to titles and structures and promises wrapped in my father's voice. But now, after reading the legal truth of my own erasure and watching my family toast Chloe's future without me, it felt like oxygen. I asked the only question that mattered. Why? Marcus leaned back and smiled. But it wasn't smug. It was tired. Because you're the only operator I've ever seen who actually understands how to balance vision and execution. You don't just manage chaos. You build systems that make people better. I don't need a brand face, Robin. I need a brain I can trust. He handed me a folder, just like he said he would. Inside was a proposal, but not a job offer. A partnership, 50-50. A clean new company built on the ashes of the ones that wore us down. No inherited politics. No silent stakeholders. No gifted titles for family. Just merit. The venture didn't even have a name yet. He wanted me to name it. That detail hit harder than I expected. In my old world, I had spent 18 years defending a name that wasn't allowed to include me. Here, I was being asked to define the brand from day one. I didn't say yes. I wasn't ready. I told him I needed time. I told him about the non-compete clause in my contract, though it only lasted 6 months and barely applied across state lines. I told him about the weight of it all, the mental fog that still hovered even after walking away. He listened. Really listened. Then he said, "You don't owe them another minute of your future. You paid in full. With interest." Later that night, I sat on my couch and stared at the proposal again. The numbers made sense. The structure was clean. The only missing variable was me. And that was the part I still didn't know how to account for. After spending so many years molding myself to fit someone else's definition of value, how was I supposed to shape something new? Who was I outside of Right Atelier? Outside of the responsible one? Outside of the older sister who fixed things no one thanked her for? I thought back to my 20s. To those first years when I still believed in blueprints and timelines and straight-line loyalty. When I would bike to the job site before dawn and take notes by hand because the firm couldn't yet afford tablets. I remembered the thrill of landing our first solo bid. The backroom negotiations with vendors twice my age who refused to look me in the eye until I showed them the numbers they couldn't ignore. I wasn't just an administrator. I was a builder. A fixer. A Kiev farce. I had let them forget that worse, I had let myself forget. That same week, I received an email from Kelly, the woman I had mentored 5 years earlier, now acting as Chloe's COO. The subject line read, "Client Transition Support." She wanted my help onboarding a new high-profile account from Georgia, apparently one that I had introduced to the firm 2 years ago. No acknowledgement of the circumstances. No reference to what had happened. Just a spreadsheet, a calendar, invite, and a tone that assumed I was still in service to the empire that had dismissed me. I didn't reply. I forwarded it to my lawyer instead. We scheduled a meeting to review my departure terms. I was done doing emotional labor masked as professionalism. The next morning, I visited the waterfront alone. Charleston always carried a strange kind of silence before 8 a.m. A mixture of ocean breeze, creaking wood, and distant gulls that reminded you how old this city really was. I walked along the harbor and thought about every structure I'd touched, every name etched in the cornerstones, every time I stayed late so the firm could shine. I thought about how none of it bore my name, and how, maybe, that was about to change. I called Marcus. "I'm in," I said. He didn't whoop or cheer. He just said, "Good. Now let's build something that's actually ours." And for the first time in months, maybe even years, I felt something crack open in my chest. Not anger. Not grief. Something keener. Like possibility. Like breath. Building something from scratch sounds romantic when you've never had to do it. But once you've spent years being the glue in a machine someone else owned, the idea of starting over doesn't feel like freedom. It feels like vertigo. No systems. No routines. No team waiting on your instruction. Just silence. I moved slowly. Marcus and I started with a borrowed conference room in Atlanta, a rotating assistant, and 2 whiteboards filled with scribbles that looked like strategy, but mostly masked the uncertainty. We didn't post about it. We didn't announce a launch. This wasn't a revenge company. It was recovery. And in the beginning, that was enough. For the first time in years, I designed the rules. We worked 4 days a week, closed email after 6 p.m., and started every Monday not with KPIs, but with clarity. Who do we want to serve? Who do we not? What kind of leadership do we want to be under our own names? The freedom was thrilling, terrifying. I would find myself double-checking my own authority, still, half-conditioned, to look over my shoulder for a father's approval or a client's permission that no longer applied. Marcus noticed. "You're still asking for a seat," he said once, after I deferred a decision about vendor rates. "You already own the table." I nodded. But habits forged in silence don't break just because the room changes. It took time. It took practice. But piece by piece, I began to feel myself return. 3 weeks into the build-out, we signed our first client. A small hospitality brand I had worked with 5 years earlier who had called me personally after hearing I'd left Right. They said Chloe's new team was beautiful but scattered. Their words, not mine. I smiled politely, declined to comment. That became my approach. I didn't gossip. I didn't correct the record. I didn't post passive-aggressive updates on LinkedIn. I worked. I built. I remembered what it felt like to create without being erased. But Chloe didn't stay quiet. A month after Marcus and I went operational, I received a forwarded message from a former vendor. Apparently, Chloe had reached out asking if I had accidentally taken internal files when I left Right Atelier. The tone was sugar-coated, but the implication was clear. She wanted people to believe I was unstable, that I had left in bitterness, that if anything started to go well for me, it must have been stolen. The vendor had known me for over a decade. He sent me the message with a note. "I trust you. Just thought you should see this." I didn't reply to Chloe. I didn't defend myself publicly. I called my attorney. We documented everything. A week later, a local design blog posted a glowing profile on Chloe's new direction for the firm. The article referenced a hard transition after losing a key executive and described her leadership style as emotionally attuned, client-centered, and unafraid to break old systems. The picture showed Chloe standing in front of a whitewashed brick wall, barefoot, holding a tablet like a trophy. She wore my bracelet, one I'd left in the office by accident during my final walkthrough. I hadn't missed it until that moment. That was her message to me. This was war. But I didn't respond. Instead, I focused inward. Our third client was a referral from Marcus's network, then another from mine. We didn't chase headlines. We delivered results. Chloe's firm was loud. Ours was steady. I wasn't trying to destroy what she built. I just wasn't going to let her destroy what I was building either. And then, quietly, the shift began. I started getting emails. Not from strangers. From legacy clients. From subcontractors who said the timelines weren't clear anymore. From consultants who missed my documentation. From people who had once praised the Wright sisters' synergy now saying things felt different. I didn't gloat. I knew what was coming. The most revealing call came from a man named Jonathan. He was the head of operations at a luxury development firm we had worked with for 6 years. He told me, carefully, that his company had terminated their contract with Wright Atelier. "It's not the same without you, Robin," he said. "Their new proposals feel pretty, but hollow. I need people who show up, not just perform." I thanked him. We didn't pitch for his contract. He offered it. And when the papers were signed, Marcus looked at me across the table and said, "You didn't take anything. They gave it away." That night, I opened a drawer and took out the notebook I hadn't touched since the day I left Wright Atelier. It was filled with client notes, old project sketches, even some half-formed ideas I never dared submit. I flipped to a blank page and wrote one sentence. "This is what it looks like when silence speaks louder than noise." I didn't need to post it. I didn't need anyone to retweet or share. I just needed to remember it for myself. Because the most satisfying revenge family story isn't about making someone pay. It's about making sure you no longer carry the cost. I had spent years believing that if I worked hard enough, stayed long enough, forgave often enough, the people who hurt me would eventually see my worth. But worth is never something you're given. It's something you claim. And once you do, no one can take it without your permission. It wasn't the collapse that made headlines. It never is. Not at first. It started with a tiny glitch in Wright Atelier's newest residential project. A design detail Chloe insisted on pushing forward, despite warnings from the engineering consultant. Then came a payment delay with a local contractor who'd been with the firm since before I joined. Vendors stopped returning calls. A supplier sent a cease and desist after a mix-up in licensing. The cracks were subtle at first. Like hairline fractures, you only see in certain light, but they were spreading fast. I heard about them through back channels. Old colleagues, clients, people who hadn't even realized I'd left until now. They reached out under the guise of catching up, but their real motive was always clear. They wanted to know if I was still watching. And I was, quietly, not with spite, but with a strange, slow ache. This wasn't vindication. It was proof of something sadder. That all those years of invisible labor, the double-checking, the crisis prevention, the client smoothing had never been seen as value. Only when it disappeared did they understand what it held together. One afternoon, I got a voicemail from Sandra, my mother. Her voice was strained, trying too hard to sound casual. She mentioned Chloe was a little overwhelmed and that your father's been quiet lately. I didn't call back. I wasn't ready to be their emotional shock absorber again. I had worked too hard to stop bleeding for people who only remembered me when things went wrong. Then came the Maxwell deal. Maxwell Properties was one of our biggest legacy clients. The contract had originally been secured by me in a brutal 6-month negotiation that nearly cost me my health. I had lived and breathed that account. They were high demand, detail-obsessed, and deeply loyal once they trusted you. After I left, Chloe had assigned Kelly to manage the transition. Kelly, whose entire professional vocabulary consisted of buzzwords and vague affirmations. Within weeks, Maxwell was raising flags. Missed deadlines, unclear invoicing, miscommunications, on-site logistics. Finally, I received an email not from Maxwell directly, but from their attorney, Daniel Keene. He wasn't just representing them. He was representing me. Daniel and I had worked together on several zoning permits years ago. He had a reputation for being ruthless, but fair. His message was simple. Client, considering termination of existing Wright Atelier agreement. Would like to know if you're available for consultation. It wasn't an offer. It was a door. I didn't walk through it. Not yet. I met with Daniel privately, a few days later, in a quiet booth at a hotel bar. He laid out the facts. Maxwell was done with Wright. They wanted continuity. They wanted competence. And more importantly, they wanted me. Not my name in a proposal. Me. My work. My process. My reputation. I asked him how Chloe had taken the feedback. He said nothing for a moment. Then replied. She seemed surprised. Genuinely didn't understand why they were unhappy. I almost pitied her. Almost. That night, I got a text from Chloe. It was the first time she had reached out directly since the wedding. No greeting. Just, I think we should talk. It's important. I stared at it for a long time. My thumb hovered over the screen. Part of me still had that old reflex, the fixer. The older sister. The one who always made space for other people's messes. But I didn't reply. Not yet. I needed to know that she wasn't calling because she needed help. I needed to know she was calling because she finally saw what she'd ignored for years. A few days later, I received a calendar invite. This time from Graham, my father. Title: Family Business Discussion. Location: private room, at his club. Time: Friday. Noon. I declined. I didn't explain. They had made all the decisions without me before. They could learn how to handle consequences the same way. Marcus and I, meanwhile, were onboarding our fifth client. Our team had grown to 4 full-time staff, and we'd just been offered office space inside a historic textile mill converted into creative suites. It was poetic. In a way, starting again inside the bones of something old. Something built to last. During a routine team meeting, one of our junior staffers brought up a rumor that Wright Atelier had paused, taking on new residential clients. Their website hadn't been updated in weeks. Chloe's personal design blog, once active, daily. I'd gone quiet. I didn't comment. I simply returned to the agenda. But inside, I felt it. That slow, building sense of shift. Not revenge. Not even satisfaction. Just the quiet return of balance. The scale tipping back in favor of the ones who had carried it in silence for too long. I was no longer waiting for them to notice my worth. I had already proven it to people who actually valued it. And that, in the end, was what mattered most. I closed my laptop that evening with a calm I hadn't felt in years. There was no need to rush the next move. The calls would come, and when they did, I wouldn't respond with anger or desperation. I would respond like someone who knew her worth and was finally done offering it at a discount. The message came on a Tuesday morning. This time, it wasn't a passive-aggressive forward or a vague calendar invite. It was a direct email from Chloe. Marked high priority. Please meet me. Just you and me. No, Dad. No, Elaine. No lawyers. Just a conversation. I owe you that much. I stared at it for a full minute. Not because I didn't expect it, but because of how carefully the words were chosen. Chloe had always been good at presentation, framing, a master of emotional timing. And yet, something about this didn't feel strategic. It felt tired, almost real. I replied with one line, 1 hour, my terms, Thursday, 10 a.m. Arborview Cafe. Don't be late. I arrived early, the way I always do. Old habits. The cafe was nearly empty. Off-season quiet. I picked the corner table with the best sightline to the entrance and ordered black coffee, no pastry. When Chloe walked in, I noticed 2 things instantly. 1, she looked older than she had at the wedding. Not in a way makeup could fix. And 2, she wasn't wearing her usual curated chaos. No scarf. No oversized rings. No vintage earrings. Just a gray coat and a look that said she wasn't here to perform. That alone disarmed me more than any apology could have. She sat across from me, folded her hands on the table, and looked at me for a long time before speaking. I didn't know it would go this way, she said. I said nothing. Let the silence hold. When Dad brought me into the business, she continued, he told me you didn't want it, that you were burned out, that you were tired of the pressure and just wanted to manage operations. He said I'd be doing you a favor. I let that sink in, not because it was new information, but because I wanted her to feel how ridiculous it sounded out loud. And you believed that I asked. She hesitated. I wanted to, she said finally. For years, I've been compared to you. You were the model, the grounded one, the adult, and I was just the decoration. I took a sip of my coffee. So your answer to feeling overlooked was to take everything I built. She winced. I didn't take it. I just stepped into what was offered. You didn't ask why it was being offered to you instead of me, I asked. Not accusing, just factual. You didn't even ask where I was during the transition, why I wasn't at the meetings, why I wasn't consulted. Chloe looked down at her hands. I think I was afraid of the answer. I watched her, waiting to feel some spark of revenge, some echo of satisfaction, but it didn't come. What I felt, strangely, was distance. like I was watching someone else explain a story I had once lived in, but no longer needed to inhabit. She looked back up. It's falling apart. Robin, I know you know. I've tried to hold it together. But I'm not you. I don't know what I'm doing. Her voice didn't shake. But it wasn't steady either. I need help, she said. Not a handout. Not charity. I need to fix this before it collapses completely. I leaned back and let her words breathe. This was the moment. The part of every revenge story where the villain comes crawling back and the hero decides whether to show mercy or not. But this wasn't a movie. This was family, which meant there were no clear villains, just damage, just patterns. I chose my words carefully. I'm not coming back, I said. I've spent enough of my life trying to hold together things that didn't value me. But that doesn't mean I want to see you fail. Her eyes flickered up, confused. Then what do you want? I want acknowledgement, I said. Public, internal, legal if necessary. I want you, Dad, Elaine, all of you to stop pretending I vanished. I want my work to be recognized for what it was. I want my name in the records, in the systems, in the legacy I helped build. And I want a clean separation. I'll sign whatever releases we need. But not until that happens. She nodded slowly. Okay, she said. I can do that. No, I said. You'll need to do more than say you can. You'll need to act on it. Get your lawyers involved. Draft something formal. Talk to your board. Fix what you can. I'm not your fixer anymore. Chloe didn't argue. She didn't cry. She just sat there, silent, letting the weight of my words settle in. You're not the villain in this story, Chloe, I said finally. But you're not the victim either. You were handed something you didn't earn. And now you have to decide whether you're willing to earn it after the fact, or give it to someone who can. She nodded, eyes damp, but not breaking. And you, she asked, what are you now? I smiled, not out of smugness, but clarity. I'm the version of me I should have been all along. I left before she could respond, not because I didn't care, but because I didn't need to hear it. The apology didn't matter, the outcome did. And this time, I wasn't going to let guilt or family ties blur the line between closure and compromise. The formal letter arrived 4 days after our meeting. It came not from Chloe, but from her attorney, an older partner at a boutique firm I recognized from Dad's previous estate planning documents. The tone was stiff, rehearsed, and carefully structured to sound like a gesture of reconciliation. They proposed an acknowledgement package that included backdated attribution on 6 major projects, a public statement of appreciation for my leadership, and a modest severance offering. It was professional. It was incomplete. What it lacked was truth. I didn't respond right away. I forwarded it to my own lawyer, then sat with the silence. I knew this phase. This was their version of closure: clean, contained, and most of all, convenient. But this wasn't about convenience anymore. It was about accuracy. And I had spent too long being erased in the name of family harmony. 3 days later, I sent back my revision. No dramatic language. No threats. Just bulletproof clarity. I listed every project I had led, every system I had implemented, every client I had secured. I attached documentation, emails, drafts, contracts in my name. I requested 15% ownership of Wright Atelier, not to return, but to represent the equity I had earned. Passive stake. No voting power. No board seat. Just silent presence. Something that would live inside their structure as a quiet record that I had existed, that I had mattered, that the firm's foundation wasn't built on charm and style alone. My lawyer added one line at the end. Her idea, not mine. The client reserves the right to transfer this stake to a charitable foundation or mentorship program of her choosing at any time. We both knew that sentence wasn't about money. It was about power. the kind that stays long after the spotlight has moved on. The response was hesitant. Graham, my father, called me directly for the first time in months. This is unnecessary, he said, his voice thinner than I remembered. We're family. Robin, you don't need to stake a claim in your own blood. I let the silence settle between us before answering. That's where you're wrong. I needed to stake a claim years ago. I just didn't know I had to. He sighed. I don't want to fight. Then don't make one, I said, and hung up. The final agreement was signed the following week. Chloe added her initials quietly. Her signature, more careful than before. Elaine didn't show. My father said little. But when I walked out of that boardroom, document in hand, I didn't feel victorious. I felt something better. Free. Word began to spread. As it always does in cities like Charleston. The story wasn't salacious. No press releases. No viral posts. Just subtle shifts. Right Atelier's updated website now listed me as Foundational Executive Leadership. 2005, 2023. The awards page included credits under both our names. The next time someone introduced me at a conference, they didn't just mention my new firm. They called me one of the original minds behind Wright's operational excellence. Marcus raised a glass at dinner that Friday. No noise. No headlines. Just history rewritten. Finally. I nodded. And no more discounts. I added. That became our inside phrase. A quiet motto for every undercredited contributor who had ever been told their work was just support. Meanwhile, our firm, now officially named Threadform Studio, continued to grow. We moved into a permanent space, a former textile dye house converted into modular offices with open beams and natural light. Our design philosophy emphasized restoration, sustainability, and quiet excellence. Clients came not for flash but for integrity. And for the first time, in 2 decades, I wasn't working to be seen. I was working to build. Then, one morning, as spring edged into summer, I received a small white envelope slipped under our studio door. No return address. Just my name in handwriting I hadn't seen in years. Inside was a folded card and a photograph. The card was from my mother. The handwriting was careful. Sunday dinner. 6 p.m. No expectations. Just a chair if you want it. The photograph was older. Probably from 10 years ago. Taken at a holiday party. Chloe and I stood side by side, arms crossed, smirking the exact same way. Back then, we still believed we were on the same team. I set the card on my desk. Didn't throw it out. Didn't RSVP either. Not yet. Because this was the turning point. The place in a betrayal story where everything could twist into bitterness. Where the protagonist has a chance to gloat or vanish or burn the whole thing down. But I wasn't interested in proving anything anymore. I had nothing to prove. The firm they gave away, I rebuilt better. The voice they tried to silence, I sharpened. The identity they denied, I claimed on my own terms. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't revenge. It was precision. And sometimes, that's enough. I didn't decide to go until the very last minute. The card from my mother had stayed on my desk for nearly a week, untouched, but never out of view. Every time I looked at it, I thought about that phrase. No expectations. Just a chair if you want it. It was the kind of sentence that sounded gentle, even generous. But underneath it was a quiet question. Are you ready to let us be people again? Not enemies. Not family roles. Just people, flawed and changing. Maybe still learning. On Sunday evening, I dressed with deliberate care. Not to impress. Not to distance. Just to be present. No blazer. No structured slacks. Just a soft navy sweater. Black jeans. And clean boots. I brought a bottle of wine. Not out of obligation, but because I knew no one else would think to. The house looked the same. The paint, The hedges, even the old wind chime by the porch light that had rusted over during hurricane season 3 years ago. When I knocked, it was Chloe who opened the door. She didn't look surprised. She just stepped aside and said, "Hey," like we had done this every Sunday. I nodded once. "Hey." Inside, the kitchen buzzed with the quiet hum of dinner preparation. My mother stood at the stove, stirring something in the same Dutch oven she'd used since I was a teenager. Dad was setting the table. Elaine wasn't there. I didn't ask why. I didn't need to. No one made a big deal of my return. There were no speeches, no long embraces, just plates being passed, napkins folded, bread being sliced. For once, the silence felt normal, not tense. The meal was simple roasted chicken, green beans, mashed potatoes, but for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was there out of duty. I was just eating, participating, observing. It was Chloe who finally broke the surface. "Threadform's website looks amazing," she said, spoon halfway to her mouth. "Your projects feel really grounded. Like, confident." I looked at her for a beat, then said, "Thank you." She didn't follow it with a disclaimer or a pivot to herself. She just nodded. My father cleared his throat. "I've been meaning to say something." My hand stilled on the stem of my wine glass. "I was wrong," he said, "about how I handled the transition, about how I assumed silence meant agreement, and about you. I should have seen what you were holding up. I didn't. And I'm sorry. It wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't polished. But it landed. Not as reparation, as recognition, and in that moment, I realized I didn't need him to grovel. I just needed him to see me without squinting." The conversation shifted back to lighter things. Chloe talked about a gallery show she'd curated. My mom shared updates about her gardening club. We laughed at something small and stupid. Dad misreading a text thread about an avocado shortage, and the kind of laughter that used to feel out of reach now felt like oxygen. I didn't stay late. I didn't volunteer to help clean. I didn't retreat either. When it was time to go, I stood up, thanked them for dinner, and walked to the door with a sense of quiet closure I didn't expect. As I stepped outside, Chloe followed me onto the porch. She held out a small box. "I found this in one of the old studio drawers," she said. I opened it. My bracelet. The one she'd worn in that magazine article photo. She looked away as I examined it. "I shouldn't have worn it," she murmured. "It was thoughtless." I looked at her. Not in anger. Just fully. "It's okay," I said. "It's not a symbol of what you took. It's a reminder of what I reclaimed." She smiled then, soft and sad. "Are we okay?" she asked. I didn't answer right away. Because okay wasn't the right word. Nothing about our story had been okay. But maybe, just maybe, we were moving towards something better. "We're on the way," I said finally. She exhaled. "Good." Driving home. I didn't replay the night in my head like I used to, dissecting every word, every tone, every sideways glance. I just drove. Quiet. Full. Grounded. In the rear view, the house faded into the distance. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was leaving anything behind. I was simply returning to the life I had built for myself. Not in spite of my family, but beyond the part of me that needed their approval. Because when you finally reclaim your voice, your value, and your vision, the past doesn't get to define the rest. You do. Summer in Charleston was always sticky, slow, and humming with heat. But that year, it felt different. Not because the air changed, but because I did. Threadform Studio was now in its second year, with a rhythm so steady, it almost startled me. We weren't chasing validation anymore. We were choosing projects that aligned with our values. We turned down clients who wanted the loudest thing in the room. We said yes to the ones who asked what their space needed to feel like, not just look like. And people were noticing, quietly, respectfully. The calls began to come in, not from those seeking trends, but from those seeking truth. It wasn't just design, it was reclamation. One morning, I got an email from the head of a women-led development fund in New York. She had heard about Threadform through one of our mentorship workshops. Her message was brief, almost clinical. "We're impressed by your philosophy. Would you be open to a partnership focused on restorative architecture for underserved communities?" I stared at the screen for a long time, not because of the offer, but because of what it meant. I had once been dismissed as too operational, not visionary enough. The silent sister. Now, visionaries were asking me how to start. At the same time, Right Atelier was quieter. Chloe had restructured the firm, scaled down to a smaller client list, and brought in a co-director with an actual operations background. Smart move. She didn't copy me. She evolved. And honestly, I respected that. But the energy around the right name had changed. People still admired the work. But there was a new caution in the air when it was mentioned. As if everyone was aware now that what glitters on the surface often hides a very human mess beneath. A few former clients even joked that Right was polished chaos, while Threadform felt like breathing. I never repeated those lines. I didn't need to. The contrast spoke for itself. And that was the most satisfying part of the entire Revenge family story. Not revenge through destruction, but quiet contrast. Authentic success. The kind that required no billboard, no spotlight, no headline. Just consistency. Just truth. I began mentoring younger women in the field, not through formal programs, but in coffee shops, late-night Zooms, voice notes sent between time zones. Most of them weren't asking how to win awards. They were asking how to not disappear in the process, how to speak up in rooms where their silence had been rewarded for too long. I told them the truth. That it's hard. That it will cost you. That you'll be called difficult, ungrateful, even disloyal. But that one day, the people who tried to clip your wings will look up and see you flying, not out of spite, but because you finally remembered you were meant to. At one point, I got a call from a regional business journal asking if I'd be open to being profiled for their Legacy Women in Design series. I paused. Legacy used to sound like something only other people got to claim. People with approval, with clean narratives, with families who lifted, not used, their ambition. But maybe legacy wasn't about how others packaged your story. Maybe it was about what you built when no one was watching. I said yes. The interview was calm, grounded, no bitterness. I spoke honestly about the split, about the silence, about the systems I rebuilt with Marcus and our team. I didn't name Chloe. I didn't need to. I ended the piece with one sentence that surprised even me. The truest kind of power is quiet, self-authored, and requires no defense. It went lightly viral, not because it was dramatic, but because so many people, especially women in male-led industries and family-dominated systems, saw themselves in it. The article prompted something unexpected. A handwritten note from Elaine, my stepmother. I hadn't heard from her in over a year. Inside the envelope was one line. "You were always building something bigger than we knew. I hope one day you'll let us be part of it again." I didn't reply. Not out of malice. Out of clarity. Some bridges aren't meant to burn. But they're not meant to be crossed again either. That fall, Threadform was invited to consult on a design curriculum at a university I had once been rejected from for grad school. I walked onto that campus, not as someone hoping to be accepted, but as someone finally sure of her place in the room. Not because I'd waited for permission, but because I'd created a door and walked through it myself. The lecture ended with a student asking, "What would you say to someone who feels erased in their own story?" I paused, then said, "Start writing your own, even if no one reads it at first, especially then, because eventually, the silence breaks, And when it does, what you built in the dark will be the thing that lights the way for someone else. That was the moment I knew. This was the ending I never saw coming. Not the comeback headline, not the courtroom drama, not the shattered rival. Just a life restored, a voice fully used, and a future that didn't begin with a wedding text or a boardroom betrayal, but with a woman who finally understood that no one could take what she had already reclaimed. It came full circle without fanfare. A quiet afternoon, 2 years to the day, since that text message changed everything. Watch your sister's wedding online. I had kept the screenshot, not out of bitterness, but as a marker, a timestamp of when the old version of me ended. And now, as I sat by the window of our studio, sunlight stretching across the reclaimed oak floors, I opened my phone, found the image, and deleted it. Not as an act of closure, as an act of release. Because I no longer needed proof of how far I'd come. My life had become the evidence. Threadform had just landed a partnership with a global foundation focused on climate-adaptive housing. We weren't the biggest firm on the list. We weren't even the flashiest. But we were the one they said felt rooted, human, and trustworthy. That word trust hit me harder than I expected. For years, I had been the one everyone trusted to fix things, hold things, carry things. But now, I was being trusted not for what I could absorb, but for what I could build. That was the shift. From invisible labor to visible impact, from silent strength to chosen leadership. One evening, Marcus and I stayed late, reviewing plans for our new mentorship space, an old warehouse we'd bought, and planned to convert into a training hub for women re-entering design after family breaks or toxic job exits. At some point, we stopped talking and just looked around. The lights were dim, the room unfinished, but there was a hum in the air, the hum of something growing from honesty. "Can you believe this started with a wedding I wasn't invited to?" I said, smiling without resentment. Marcus laughed. "Can you believe they thought that was the end of your story?" It wasn't lost on me how poetic the arc had been. Betrayal, exile, grief, then clarity, rebuilding, legacy. And the best part, I hadn't had to destroy anyone to get here. No takedown expose. No legal firestorm. Just facts. Just persistence. Just being undeniable. Chloe's firm had stabilized. Not meteoric, but solid. We didn't compete. We coexisted. Occasionally, a referral even came through from her side. No one announced it. It just happened, quietly, like a truce without terms. One day, I received an invitation. This time, not to a wedding, but to speak at a national conference on women in family business. The panel topic: ownership, recognition, and the power of walking away. I stared at the title for a long time, then wrote back yes, I'll speak. Because the truth was, leaving didn't break me. It revealed me. And maybe someone in that audience was still waiting for permission to take up space they'd been told wasn't theirs to claim. The night before the panel, I stood alone in my hotel room, finalizing my notes. I didn't start with credentials. I didn't even start with the firm. I started with the sentence that once shattered something in me. Watch your sister's wedding online. Then I let the silence hang. Let it sting. Before saying, I watched. And then I watched everything else fall. And in the rubble, I didn't pick up the old tools. I forged new ones. Not to rebuild what was taken, but to build something no one could take from me again. The applause at the end wasn't loud. It was deep. The kind that comes from people who don't need to be entertained, they need to be seen. Afterward, a woman came up to me, mid-42nd, eyes tired but determined. I've spent 10 years trying to be let back in, she said. You made me realize I can stop knocking. I nodded. You can start building. She smiled. No revenge. I shook my head. Just results. Later that month, I walked the grounds of our mentorship center for the first time since it was completed. The walls were painted soft clay. The windows let in real light. The kind you don't notice until it lands gently across your face. In the main hallway, there was a framed plaque that read, "You are not difficult. You are not too much. You are not invisible. You are a builder." I stood there longer than I planned, then stepped outside where a new group of mentees were arriving. Some nervous, some guarded. All of them carrying stories that had once made them small. And now, they were here to take up space. To build not just resumes, but identities that wouldn't shrink for anyone again. The Revenge family story wasn't really about revenge at all. It was about reclamation. About becoming so deeply yourself that no betrayal could ever rewrite your truth. I didn't need an apology anymore. I didn't need a seat at their table. I had built a table of my own, and around it sat people who saw, heard, and valued me not for how well I stayed silent, but for how clearly I spoke. And that, more than anything, that was the ending I never knew I deserved.